Hey everyone! So this is just a quick video I wanted to make about something that's been bothering me for a while. And this is about Civilization 7, but it's not just about Civilization 7. Civilization 7 is just the most recent example of it. And this has to do with the way games are covered on YouTube by many people. Because at this point, we all know how Civilization 7 launch was, and what the overall sentiment in the Civilization community is. And you see a lot of these negative videos that are popping up on YouTube right now, but try to find them 5 months ago, and they were nowhere to be seen. As you guys might remember, I made a couple of videos that were pretty damn critical towards Civilization 7 5 months ago, back in basically early September 2024. Here's one example. This is a video I published on September the 4th, 2024. And I did talk about quite a few things in this one, because it's 31 minutes long. But yeah, I was pretty damn critical in it. And I definitely caught some flack in the Civ community for it at the time. And if you look for videos also published around that time period, the vast overwhelming majority of them were very positive, because the hype was basically at the all-time high at that time, and in a lot of cases, if you offered some criticism, you were perceived as a naysayer, no matter how well made your argument was. But now that Civilization 7 has already been released, and a lot of the early criticisms have proven to be correct, and the overall sentiment in the Civ community is mixed, you see a lot of these negative videos popping up on YouTube to just ride the wave. And this is something that really annoys me, because I'm not going to call out anyone in particular. I mean, you can just search on YouTube and you will find a lot of negative videos posted within the last few days or so. And at least some of these videos come from people who were overwhelmingly positive 5 months ago. Because what actually happens on YouTube is that you get way more views if you validate people's existing biases. That's what actually happens. And yes, negativity clicks, which is like something you often see people say on the internet, but this is only true if there's already a negative sentiment to some extent. If you try to be very negative towards a game most people are overwhelmingly positive about, you're going to have a bad time. And I'm not saying you should be doing that just to be contrarian, by the way, because being contrarian just for the sake of being contrarian is just as bad as always following the common sentiment. But what I'm saying is that this is like a bigger problem on YouTube, and not just on YouTube, but in media in general. And I'm sure many of you have noticed it. Something very similar happened with Millennia. Maybe some of you remember a video I had before Millennia release, where I was pretty damn critical towards it. And I also caught quite a lot of flack for that within the, let's just say, YouTuber community. In one of the Discords, I was literally jokingly called a resident Millennia hater, because I was the only single person in there who was critical towards that game before its release. And then, after it already got released, well, everyone suddenly changed their tune or just stopped talking about it at all because there were no views in it anymore. And there were many other examples of this happening with many different games, both on a smaller scale and on a bigger scale. One of the most hilarious examples, to me, is I think Cyberpunk, because we all know what happened with Cyberpunk. First, it was massively hyped up, leading up to release. The actual release was then a dumpster fire, so the overall sentiment was negative for a while. And now the game is in a pretty good shape, so the overall sentiment has shifted to positive. And you can find people on YouTube who were overwhelmingly positive before release, then they were bashing the game for weeks after release, and now they post videos how, oh, it's always been good actually. And these are videos coming from the same exact person. And it's not like different channels posting these things. It's the same exact person doing it a lot of the time. Because what often happens on YouTube is people following the dominant sentiment. You get better clicks and better views for validating people's existing biases. It's just how it works. The same exact thing happens in traditional media. And I know it's kind of pointless trying to fight with this, because you're not going to win. It's just human nature, I guess. And obviously, at the risk of stating the obvious, more views on YouTube means more money. Well, obviously not just on YouTube. But in this case, I'm using YouTube as an example. And I mean, my opinion has not really changed. It's been the same all along. I had some early concerns, and I'm sure many of you remember that back after the initial reveals, the first gameplay reveals in August, September 2024, I had quite a few early concerns about how things are actually going to work out in practice. And guess what? A lot of them turned out to be entirely correct. After all, I've played strategy games for over 30 years. So some of these issues were pretty obvious to me from very early on. And since I mentioned Millennia, what happened with that game actually really pissed me off, because to me it was extremely obvious from very early on when I started playing that it's just not going to be a successful game for a whole number of reasons that to me were so obvious that at times I felt like I'm in a crazy land, because everyone else I knew was very positive about it at the time. And for a while, I thought I'm going crazy or something like that. And speaking of Civilization 7, one of the things I talked about 5 months ago is the price versus expectations, which is also something that's almost never talked about by reviewers, and it's driving me absolutely crazy. Some of them do talk about it, and I will give them full credit for doing so, but the overwhelming majority does not. And to me, it's always been incredibly obvious that people will have different expectations from a game that costs $10, from a game that costs $40, and from a game that costs 75 or 100. Like, this is basic logic to me. Like, it's so obvious it shouldn't even have to be stated. But I had some extremely long arguments with some people before that this is a non-factor and it doesn't matter. But to me, this is one of the reasons why people are disappointed with Civilization 7. Because of its pricing, because of its aggressive monetization, combined with the fact that the game is very clearly unfinished in many different ways. And by the way, I know it's sometimes a bit of a meme on the internet how developers release unfinished games, but to me, Civilization 7 is actually one of the best examples of an actual unfinished AAA game that was released. There are so many things about Civilization 7 that are in such an obvious unfinished state that I'm actually perplexed. Like, I'm not mad, I'm not disappointed, I'm just perplexed that the game was released in this state. I genuinely am. It's just puzzling to me. But obviously, it's not just that. There is a sizable group of people out there who dislike the age transition system because it disrupts the gameplay in a major way. And guess what? I pretty much predicted that's what would happen 5 months ago. But I remember how many people told me at the time that I'm crazy. This is like the best system of all time. Anyway, this was a bit of a rant. So what I guess I'm really saying is that, as many of you already know, because you have watched me for many years, I actually don't give a shit, in the sense that I will state my opinions no matter what the dominant sentiment is. I have no problem going against it. And personally, I always had a lot of respect towards people who have the balls to state their true opinions, even if that opinion goes against the general consensus at the time. But the reality is that that's not what gets views on YouTube. And I'm sure you will see a very similar situation many times again in the future. A big hyped up game is coming up, and the overwhelming majority of videos on YouTube are, well, overwhelmingly positive, because that's the general sentiment surrounding the game leading up to release. And this is often despite very obvious red flags that you can often see before release. And then when the release actually happens, and the reception is mixed or negative, All of those people who were overwhelmingly positive just a few months prior suddenly switch to negative, because that's what gets views. And then, in some cases like Cyberpunk, for example, when the game ends up being good a number of months or years later, and the general consensus shifts to positive, all those people who were bashing it will now make videos saying, oh, it's always been good, actually. And sometimes even delete their old videos criticizing it. And to me, that's like disgusting behavior, to be honest. Have the balls to state your true opinions and stand behind them. And by the way, here's my prediction. If Civilization 7 upholds the Civilization series tradition and ends up being really good, let's say 2 years from now, after 2 expansions, I'm 100% certain that you will have a lot of people on the internet then saying how, oh, it's actually always been kind of good. Or, oh, the release wasn't as bad as people say it was. And as far as I'm concerned, you guys can be 100% certain that I will always give you my actual, true, genuine opinion, even if it goes against the general sentiment at the time. And by the way, I'm not saying anyone has to agree with my opinion, because opinions are just that. They are opinions. Everyone is entitled to have one. What actually annoys me is, like I stated earlier, people who change their opinion depending on what the majority consensus is. Because validating people's existing biases is what gets views on YouTube and in the media in general. Anyway, thanks for listening to this mini rant, I guess, and I will see you next time.